Welcome! Today we're going to do Swirlware, also known as Agateware. It's a technique where you combine different colors of clay, and then when you throw them together you get these beautiful swirly effects. This is not glaze, this is different colors of clay. But unlike this one that is made in porcelain, today we're going to do the same but in stoneware. As I mentioned in the beginning, I have mostly been doing my Agateware or Swirlware in porcelain. And the reason is that porcelain is super white, especially this one. It's called Audrey Blackman. It's a very white, very fine porcelain. And I have then used this as a base, and then I've taken little lumps of that, and I've used stains, body stains, colorants, and mixed it into the clay, and used it in the bowl, added it to the bowl, and then thrown it. So this gives me these beautiful shapes. But I also want to do it in stoneware, and I want to have a darker base and lighter stripes. You could also do it the same way, find some light stoneware, but stoneware is just not as white as porcelain. And it's also beautiful. I've seen some other potters do it with dark clay, black clay or very brown clay, and adding lighter stripes. It could be white stripes or it could be colored stripes. Today I'm gonna try out with two different kinds of clay that I like very much. One of them is 551 from George & Snyder. It's a very high iron clay, and when it fires and you give it just a transparent glaze, you get this very old-fashioned sort of traditional dark brown color. And I think light stripes in this would look beautiful. The other clay I'm going to use is the one I also use for my plates, 371, also from George & Snyder in Germany. It's a black, almost black, very dark clay. Comes out really beautiful, and it's so nice to work with. Light stripes in that I think will also be good. So for the light stripes, I have two different options. I mostly work, as you can hear, with George & Snyder clay from Germany. And one I will try is 1100. Technically, this is a porcelain, but it works almost like a stoneware, and the shrinkage rate is almost identical to stoneware. I could, of course, use a wider porcelain like Audrey Blackman, but the problem with that is that the shrinkage rate is almost twice as high, almost 20%, versus the 10% of the stoneware. It's not impossible to do it. I've done it in the past, but you get a little bit of a bulby surface because it shrinks in different rates. So today I'm going to try and mix light and dark clays that have similar shrinkage rates. Some of them have grog, some of them don't, but as I'm going to smooth the surface completely, I don't think that's going to be an issue. So I also have another white clay, 209, also from George & Snyder. That is a super white stoneware. It is, again, not as white as porcelain, but it is rather white. And I think in contrast to the darker base clay, I think it may work. So I'm going to try combinations of the dark brown clay, the iron clay, and the black clay, and the two different white ones. I'm just going to start out with the white stripes, and then maybe I will move on with some colored stripes. Especially green and blue can look really good on dark surface. So let's start out with one of the brown 551 types of clay. There are, of course, many ways that you can introduce the contrast color into your clay. The first way that I originally did it is I cut slices of the clay and I stacked these slices, so dark, light, or different colors, and I put it into like one bowl of clay. The advantage of doing that is that you get the color throughout the clay ball, so both on the inside and the outside of whatever pot you're making. And if you're making an open form pot like a bowl, that may be desirable. The downside is that you're going to use a lot more of the contrast clay than with my other techniques. When you're using just two different types of clay, a dark and a light, that doesn't matter. But if you're mixing your own colors with body stains, you probably know they're quite expensive. So you want to use as little as possible. Also, I think sometimes the contrast color becomes too dominant. I actually like how it turns out with this one, where it's just a decoration. So most of it is white, but then you have a few colors swirling around. That's, of course, a question of taste, but I like that. So for that reason, both reasons, we're going to use a different technique today, where I center this clay ball, it's a couple of kilos or something. I'm going to do a vase. So because it's a closed form, you can't really see inside. I'm only going to add the contrast color, in this case white, to the outside. So first I'm going to center it. Then we're going to cut out some holes. You can either like drill in some holes or press in some holes and add some clay. Or you can cut out with a trim tool something, cut out some slices around it or swirl it around, whatever you like, and then fill it in with the contrast colored clay. Now the challenge with this technique is that because the color, the contrast color is not all the way through the clay ball, depending on how thick your walls are, depending on how much you're going to trim away, you may actually end up trimming away all the color. So if it's a very thin layer of color and you trim your pot very much, then you're just going to trim everything away. So I like to do trimming. You probably know that if you've seen some of my past videos, for two reasons. I love trimming, and I love the fact that you can sort of reshape your pot. And also I'm not very good at throwing very thin, and I like my pots to be at least medium thin. So trimming is my my solution to that. I know I should become a better thrower, but I hope time will benefit me with that. Anyway, we're going to use the technique where I cut out pieces of it. The thing you cut out, of course, you can return right back and wedge up for the next bowl you're going to do. And then we're going to add some of the white clay. And first I'm going to use the 1100, the porcelain, technically porcelain. I'm going to add that and see how it turns out. So now we have a basic centered clay ball. Doesn't take too long. And now we're ready to cut out some pieces of it and add the white porcelain in this case. In this case, I'm just going to use a standard trim tool. I'm just going to cut out from the bottom here. And I'm going to cut pretty deep because, as I mentioned, if I don't cut deep enough and I trim away too much, then nothing's going to be left. So let's just see here. Yeah, this is, of course, this clay is on the wet side, soft side. So of course it sticks to my clay ball, but that's fine. Now I hope you can see that it's actually quite deep. I'm gonna give it one more stripe like this, and again you can add more, you can add less. I like it to be not so much. So most of the finished pot, in this case a vase, will be the base color, and only part of it will be the contrast color, or whatever you want to call it. And this is very sticky. If your clay is a little less wet than this, it of course will be easier. But now we have this. So let's add the contrast clay. There's several ways that you can prepare your clay for the cutout that I just made. The solution that I prefer to use, now I got it polluted a little bit with the brown clay, which is fine for this, but I still want to wipe it off like that. I like to roll coils because that's an easy way to add it to the cutouts that I made. So I'm just going to roll. I think this is too much. Just going to roll this to about the thickness of whatever you cut out. So I think something like this is going to work. Then we're going to take it to my pot and put it in the grooves that I cut out. The first challenge is that you want to try and avoid trapping air holes in here. So I may just like smooth it out a little bit before I add the white, and that should help. So I'm just going to add one, and I'm sort of like pressing it from one end to the other, so that should help avoid getting the air holes. And I'll take the same thing here. So now it's becoming almost like one bowl. The first step is to sort of recenter it and push in the added clay so it doesn't act like two different kinds of clay. And now, of course, when we do this, the dark clay is going to cover the white and you won't actually see anything. But don't worry, it's going to come back in a second. So I use quite a bit of force, and sometimes I can actually feel this bit of an air bubble here. And sometimes you have to work a little bit more to push that out. And maybe you will find more air bubbles as you start opening up the clay ball and expanding it, but then you just have to get rid of them as you go. So now we have it back to centering, and now the surface feels smooth. It feels like one clay ball. So now it's time to do like you would always do when you do a pot. Can you hear that? There was some air bubbles, and as we go along, we'll fix that. It is definitely a little more tricky to throw with these mixed clays because they're not the same, and they're gonna react to each other in ways that just makes it a little more wobbly. But yeah, well, this is something you have to live with. Getting ready for our first pulls, and yeah, it is a little bit unstable, and I can see now that there's a couple of bubbles here that I may want to just see if I can poke a hole in and get rid of. It'll be easier when we pull the walls. I mean, I could have cut out this part of the video because I wouldn't say it's embarrassing, but it's not the way it was supposed to be. But as always, I show you all my errors. This is one of them. I should have maybe mixed it up a little bit better. I'm going to see if we can compress our way out of it and poke holes in the air bubbles. I think sometimes it's successful. So let's see how it moves on. I definitely need to cut off some of the top. I think I actually want to go ahead and take some of that out now because it's not easy to deal with like this. Just going to reuse that when we do the next one. Yeah, that's much better. And now when I scrape off the slip, you begin to see some of those white stripes, and that's when you can start judging whether you got enough clay, enough of the contrast clay or not. Yeah, there's definitely some stripes. It's a little difficult to see on the video, I think, but and the contrast will be bigger after it has been fired. But it's not too bad. But I think we're going to add more white to the next one. But let me just finish this. So now you see there's actually some nice stripes, and as I said, the contrast is gonna get bigger when we trim it. So I think that's pretty much the first one sort of the shape that I was aiming for. Doesn't always succeed with that, but the contrast and the coloring will be stronger after I trim it and after I fire it. So this is just the first step. But I'm gonna let it dry until tomorrow, and then we'll do a little bit of trimming, and hopefully you can see how the colors are gonna come out stronger. Now I'm gonna try again, but this time with a little bit of a twist, because in the first version we cut out slices and put in coals of the contrast clay, the white clay. This time I'm gonna poke holes into it and put white clay into the holes. I had good experience with that too, and hopefully we'll get a little more of the white this time. I don't know, I have a third option that I will try after this one. Then we'll move on to the next clay. So now we have the basic centering of the clay ball. And then I'm going to use a stick. It can be any kind of stick, but I think this have a nice size to it. Just going to poke in some holes, some random holes here, like this. Now, as I said, the problem with this is that it's going to be a little more compressed in there, the clay. So it may not work. I never tried with this clay, so let's see how it goes. Then I'm going to take the white clay and I'm going to put in clay, try and fill out the hole as well as possible. Something like this. And again, trying to avoid getting air trapped in there. So I'm trying make it like a sticky shape here, so it can go in there and get good. The thing on the surface is most likely gonna be scraped off, so it's only the stuff that we get into it here that's gonna be visible. But it's no problem that you add a little bit too much. That should be fine. So I usually clap it a little bit just to get it a little more even, and then start massaging it into my already centered clay ball. Maybe this will give me a little less problem with the air bubbles. I don't know for sure, but time will tell. And hopefully we're going to get a little more white out of it. So let's see how it goes. It is a little bit on the soft side, which makes it much easier to center, but a little more difficult to throw, but that's how it is. At least there's no bubbling sounds now, but that's because it didn't go so deep into the clay. So, and again, I'm gonna have a relatively thick foot because I'm gonna most likely trim a foot on this. Compress it really well. It's always a good idea. Squeeze it in. I still have a bit of bumping here. Sometimes you need to push it up and down a little bit to compress it and get rid of those bumps. I can also feel now I have a little bit of a problem with this bat. I do have a bat made, sort of a plastic piece I can put under it, and I think I should have done that in this case, but it's too late now. Still a little bit of air trap here, so I'll try and get rid of that. Yeah, see now, the stripes are coming out. It doesn't look much more dramatic much more vivid than the other version, but we do get the stripes. So it's a start. Yeah, I think actually the white comes out less than it did on the other one. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So yeah, I do have some problems right here. I'll see if I can maybe even it out just a little bit. It's not a big problem, but it's just not so even as I would like it to be. So, yeah, that was better. Just need to get rid of the slip in the bottom here. And I think the walls are okay now, so I'm gonna start doing a little bit of shaping. Before I close it up in the top, I just want to make sure that I get rid of the slip and water in the bottom. See, that was good. Just cut off the top a little bit because it's become too uneven, which is an easy fix, like this. Now I'm going to use a metal rib, flexible rib, to just scrape off as much of the slip as I can, because that's going to reveal the white contrast clay, so we can better see the stripes that we created. And yeah, this is actually, I think maybe it's better than the other one. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely not bad. I'm just gonna take off some of the excessive clay down here. Don't need that. I can also do it in the trimming stage, but just getting rid of it now means that it will dry a little bit quicker. So, I don't think this is too bad. So, I am not dissatisfied, not entirely satisfied either, but somewhere in between, I guess. So, again, it will be more contrasty when we, after it's dried, after it's trimmed, after it's fired. So, I think I'll just let this one dry for tomorrow, I guess, and then I will trim it, and then we'll see. For my last test with this clay, the brown clay, I am going to do it in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to do slices of clay and put them like pancakes on top of each other, which will give me much more of the contrast clay, and also it will go all the way through. So I'm thinking of making an open form so we can see both inside and outside of this. So let's move on with the stacking. So I have here a clay ball that is more or less ready to throw. It's making an awful lot of noise. I'm just gonna move this. So I'm just gonna turn it into a cylinder because that's gonna make the whole stacking process easier. Now we have a cylinder, and now we have the white clay here. So I'm going to basically create a sort of a similar cylinder to this. So this is like almost the same. So from this, I'm going to cut some slices on both the base clay and the white clay, and decide where to have it. So I'm going to have some here, maybe something in the top. So I need 3 slices. So I could of course make many more slices, but this is what I decided for this one. So I'm going to put the slice here. Make sure that you don't trap any air again. Put it back here. Sometimes you can like put it like from one side to the next. give it a few slaps. Take another piece of the white clay here, the brown, and last piece of the white here. Now, if this had been with a colored clay with stains, it would have been sort of expensive. But these are just two different kinds of normal clay, so they cost about the same. So it doesn't really matter much in terms of the cost. So I usually just slap it a little bit together like this. And let's see how that works on the wheel. So we're going to slap this. Of course, it ended up being a little more clay than the other one, but that's fine. Sometimes it helps to use a rib and sort of press in the clay to make sure that there's a minimum of bumps and lumps and air bubbles. It doesn't always help, but sometimes it do. Even though I'm going to make an open form, especially with a soft clay like this, I like to keep it sort of tight to begin with. I can always expand it, but it can be difficult to make it small again. So it's always a good strategy I found. And now I like to throw really fast, but for this clay that is a little more soft, I think I need to throw it a little slower. I'm just trying to even out the walls now, which is a little more challenging with this. And now I'm going to do something that personally I find really difficult, but I've been rehearsing it using ribs on the inside as well as on the outside. And especially when you have these uneven layers of clay, that can be very, very helpful. I'm just going to go back to the one rib and try and work a little bit on the inside. And contrary to when you're pulling up, you need to be very careful at the top and don't push it too much. And then as you go down the side and get closer to the bottom, you can and should apply more and more pressure because you need to move more clay down here. So up here, you have to be very gentle and then slowly apply more and more pressure as you go down. At this point, because two things, this clay is on the wet side, it's a little bit too soft, and because of the layers of clay, and because I got it a little bit too thin here, I'm gonna use a air blower, a heat gun, to sort of strengthen the clay a little bit down here and a little bit on the upper third of it. Just using my hand on the outside to make sure that it doesn't completely wobble off. More or less continuous form here. Of course now you can almost see it. It's not going to be those swirly stripes because we put it like dices on top of each other. And that's going to make a different pattern. But I sort of like this too. And I just want to show you how that comes out. This is one of my favorite tools, a mud tool rib. They have different colors for different flexibility. This is like a medium, so you can still bend it and make really nice shapes on the inside of your bowls. And then when I go down to like the upper third, I always support the outside top because I will put some pressure now on the inside. If I don't support it in the top, then it'll just flare out and want that. So it's always a question of when to stop. And very often you stop too late and then you break your pot. But I think this is actually as much as I want to do with this one. All in all, it's a different way of mixing the glaze, but I think it also adds some interesting things. And of course, I could just give this a clear glaze, but even if I give it a color glaze, because of the different underlaying glaze, it will come out very different and can be interesting. So that was it for now. Now it's time to trim the pots. It's early in the morning and the pots have been dried overnight. Even though it's kind of cold, I think the humidity is low, so they dry pretty fast in my studio, which is fine for this kind of clay. You may not always trim your pots, but when you do these Swirlware pots, you always want to do it, because on the surface of the pot, there's still a little bit of slurry, a little bit of something clouding the sharpness and the contrast of the colors. So even if you just trim very lightly, you just want to trim that layer away. In that case, you can just use a flexible metal whip and just scrape off that outer layer. In my case, as I explained before, with my limited throwing skills, I always end up making it a little more heavy than what I would like. So I also have a shaping and improving of the pot to do with my trimming. So I'm going to start out, and I'm not going to show you how I trim all the pots that we made, because the principle is the same. But I do want to show you, and hopefully it will show in the video, the difference between what it looks like now, where you can still see that there's some colors, and how it will stand out much more once we trim it. I don't know how well it shows on the video, but the difference here is dramatic. Before it was like a little bit of a blurry sort of two-color pot, and now it stands out like so much more vivid. It's a dramatic change. I also, as I said, I want to make sure that my pot is not too thick. It's actually not too bad, this one, but I would like to trim off a little more. And now, of course, comes the tricky part, because as you remember, or maybe you don't, but for this particular pot, we only put, or I only put the clay in a groove that I cut out. So I don't know how deep this goes. So the risk now is, if I trim too much, I trim away all the white. I think it goes pretty deep. It's not on the inside, so it's definitely only in the top layer. So I don't want to trim away too much. On the other hand, I want it to be a little bit lighter, but I think we can trim a little bit more here. Yeah, it is getting out much stronger. I hope you can see it. So now I just want to make sure that my shape and the thickness of the walls are good before I do the final little thing. And I just want to take out just a little bit more down here. I always get too much clay at the bottom, but it's not that bad with this one. But still, having a smaller foot will make it look a little more elegant. I don't think I'm going to trim a foot on this one, because I think my button ended up being very, very thin, and which is good, but of course it won't leave me any room for trimming a foot. Sometimes when you tap it, you can hear how thick it is, because I can't get my hand in here, so I can't feel it. But when you tap it, the higher pitch, the thicker it is. The deeper pitch, the more thin it is. So you can with some experience, you can sort of tap your way to measure the thickness of your pot. It also depends a little bit, of course, on how dry it is. Have to have a certain dryness before you can do the tapping. So now I think the shape is in order. The last thing I want to do and that I always do with my my Swirlware pot, is to use a metal rib, flexible rib, and just scrape off the last piece of surface that may be cluttering up the color. So, and I keep it like this. I'm not trying to smooth it because it's going to get a layer of glaze. It doesn't need to be burnished. It's super smooth. But I want to make sure that there's nothing that clutters up the contrast of my colors. Also, this make sure that there's no small chewing marks. Sometimes, depending on your tool, you can have these little chewing marks. And I think it looks better if it's relatively straight and smooth. And again, it doesn't have to be burnished, but just straight surface. Look at how much more sharp that the colors come out now. Remember when we were throwing it? It looked like there was almost nothing, but there is. And this is the one where I cut out stripes and put them in a different color. And I think this looks really nice. And it's going to be even more vivid, stronger when it's glazed. I'll get back to you and see that. I think the first couple of pots turned out okay. It was a little bit messy with the bowl, but I think after the trimming, it should all be good. And I will show you how much more bright it's going to be, how much more contrasty it's going to be. I'm going to do a few more with the brown clay before we move on to the black one. But instead of the other white, so-called porcelain, but really act like a stoneware, I'm going to use this 209, which is a stoneware. It's super white and have no grog in it. The brown clay do have some grog, but it's very smooth. So I hope they're going to combine. But I'm not going to make it just white or brown. I'm going to color this clay, and I'm going to use this green, Victoria green I got from Germany. They have a very bright green. And I think the bright green in contrast to the dark brown and even maybe the black clay will look really good. So first, we have to mix in some colors into the clay. Mixing stains into a clay can be sort of a messy thing because you have to mix it a lot. And so therefore, I'm using gloves. I'm just using these rubber gloves, cheap rubber gloves, to make sure that I'm not too dirty when I'm done with it. So I'm just gonna mix maybe about 1 kilo or something. Ideally, when you mix in the colors, you would leave the clay for a few days to sort of absorb it, and it just makes it easier to throw. I don't have time for that today. I'm just gonna mix it and use it right away. I will have something left, so I'm probably not gonna use it all. In case you do, wrap it up in some plastic or something very tight. Make sure it doesn't dry out, because there is a cost to the stains, and you don't want to drop that clay. So to mix it up, what I do is I take a little bit of water and I mix it up with the stain, so it becomes like a paste. And then I brush that paste onto the clay, and then I mix it in. If you just add powder, I found that it's really difficult to get an even distribution of the color in the clay. So by doing this, it's much easier. But use as little water as possible, because of course the more water you add, the more watery the clay is going to be. It's going to be softer, and it's not going to match the consistency of the base clay that you're using. For each of the stains that I'm using, I have written down what the optimal solution is. This is based on the information that I got from the producers, and it's very different. For some stains you only need a couple of percent, like cobalt-based stains, and for some stains you need maybe up to 10%. For this one, it's 6%. Some of them have a range like 3 to 6%, but for this purpose, I usually mix it with the maximum amount of stains. Don't put in too much, because if it's too much, if it's too stainy, then you may end up with some clay that's bubbling up when you fire it. So we're gonna mix 60% or 6%, sorry. And since I'm gonna mix 1 kilo of clay, that's 60 grams. So let's go ahead with that. First, I make sure to reset my scale, including the bowl that I'm going to use. And then I'm going to add 60 grams. That was a little bit too much. 60 grams. I'm going to add as little water as possible to dissolve it into a paste. I'm just going to test it out. It's easier to add too little water and add more than it is, of course, to remove it. So, yeah, something like this. See, it's just like a thick paste. This, I think, is good. You want to mix it up so that it's sort of like thick yogurt or something, thick cream. It doesn't look like much, but trust me, it's going to be very good. So now we're ready to apply this to the clay. Here's a kilo of clay, and as you may notice, there's a little bit of molding because it's been sitting in my storage for a long time. But that doesn't matter because mold is just going to burn away. I'm just going to give it just an initial wedge, just a little bit, because I'm going to wedge it so much more with when I add the stains paste. This is a little bit on the dry side, which is actually okay because we're going to add a little bit of water with the paste. So I'm just going to make a flat slab of this clay, and then I'm going to add the stains to this. By doing so, you already sort of get it distributed well into the clay, and it just makes mixing it so much easier. Don't worry about the last part. We're going to get that out in a second. But now it's time to get the gloves on. It's also super nice in a way, in a childish way. So, don't worry about air holes or air bubbles and things like that to begin with. Just try and mix it into the clay as best as possible. And of course, you want to use all the stains, not only because it costs money, but also to reach your target of the 6%. Now you see, we had a little bit of color left in the bowl. So I'm just going to use some of the clay, scrape it off my pencil. I'm going to scrape it off the inside of the bowl. So like this. See, now we get almost all of it out. So that should be good. I'm just going to continue with this. It does take a lot of wedging. Because you can see now the colors getting into the clay, but it's not even close to being even. So it's a little more difficult to wedge with rubber gloves on, but I'll get there. Funny thing is now, it almost looks like there's no color in it, but trust me, there is. And in the end, after it's fired and all, it will stand out. It should, I hope. Feels a little bit strange. It's not too dry, but it's just flaking a little bit. So I'm not sure if this clay is getting too old. I don't think so. But now you can see there's no lumps of colors. It's all evenly distributed. There was a little bit here, but it's all evenly distributed. So even though you don't actually see it much now, it's in there. It does look a little bit greenish, doesn't it? I think it's okay. So now we're ready to throw with the colored white clay, green colored white clay. So now we have a basic centered clay ball, and judging from my first test with the pure white clay, I think that what turns out best is when I cut holes in it. So I'm gonna do that too. But also, we didn't get so much color into it. So I'm gonna cut the holes a little bit bigger than the first time. So I'm gonna use, instead, I'm gonna use this one. It's a little bit bigger. And also cut very deep. So it's not just sitting in the surface, but goes into the clay ball. So that's a good lump. Again, first step is to sort of massage it into the bowl so it becomes one piece of clay. Ready to open it. Yeah, this actually feels much better. There's a little bit of bubbles, but it's very little. And of course, right now you can't see any swirling, any dual colors, because the brown clay is just covering everything, but it's down there. And now that I use the rib, you can begin to see the color, and I think you can almost see now that it's not white, that it is colored green. I think it sort of shows already. I'm just starting to shape it a little bit. I want sort of a classic vase shape for this one. I think you can now see how much difference it is with green slip or green colored clay. And I think it looks better now that I got more, a bit more clay of the contrast clay, green clay into the clay ball. So there's a little more heavy stripes, which I think is beautiful. And I'm just gonna clean up the surface. So don't leave too much slip there. And there's even some stripes here in the inside of the head, or the rim. I think that looks good. It's always a question of when to stop, and I think now is when. Of course, again, as I mentioned before, once I trim it, and especially after it's fired, where the brown or red now is going to turn very brown, dark brown, I think that the contrast and the colors here are going to shine out so much more. So for the second one of my green swirlware, I gone back to what I also tested with the white clay. I put in dices of color, but I turn it around. So instead of having the colors like this, the colors now like this. And because I have a few coils left, I'm gonna add this as well on top. So we're hopefully gonna get a lot more green in this one. See how it turns out. And now I'm gonna add some of the coils that I made. Maybe just 3 of them, I think. Let's see how it acts. Oops, that was a bubble, but that one I bursted. I always make the bottom a little bit wider than what I know I'm going to end up with, because if I make it too narrow, then I'm going to have too much clay down there. But by making it a little bit too big, then when I compress it in, when I squeeze it in, I still end up with not too much clay down there. So it's just what I found works for me. So now it's getting closer, and I think it shows that we use so much more, I use so much more colored clay. I think it comes out stronger. It'll be interesting to see if we can see a real difference once it's trimmed and not at least fired. For my next test, I'm going to try with a black clay. This is one of my favorite black ones, also from Schneider in Germany. It's number 371. My only problem with this clay is that it looks really nice when I fire it. It actually, when I fire it to full glaze temperature, it becomes a little bit darker than this. This is just some white porcelain slip I tried out on this. But then, when I glaze it, at least with my transparent shiny glaze, I think the color is a little bit, well, I'm not so happy about that. Anyway, I can just leave these vases unglazed on the outside and glaze them on the inside if I choose to do that. But I think that the contrast between the black and the light stripes is going to be nice. I'm going to try out first with some of the white clay. I'm going to use the 1100 because it's a little softer. I think the color on the 1100 and 209 is almost the same, and it's easier to work with the 1100, so that's what I'm going to use. Except for the fact that black clay is sort of messy. It is one of my favorite clays to work with. It is smooth and nice, and it's also the ones that I use for my dinner plates. So now we have this centered, and I'm ready to make some cuts. And just like the last one I did, I'm going to make some really wide and deep cuts because I think that turned out the best. And of course, remember that the clay that you're cutting out here, you can take it right over and wedge it up for a new pot. You don't have to put it through reclaim or anything because it's just fresh clay. And again, just going to smooth the inside a little bit. And again, it's just an attempt to try not to trap air in there. Yeah, this is a nice thick coil. I think that looks good. It's a good starting point at least. Trying to squeeze it into becoming one clay ball. So see, as soon as I scrape off some of the slip, the white color is revealed. This is good. I'm going to scrape it with the flexible rim, the metal rim, or rib. See, now we get a lot more of the white stripes. I think that's not so bad. So, I think we made it. And I do think, from my initial look, that the white stripes does stand out stronger on the black background. But then again, the red clay that will turn dark brown, it's difficult to judge before it's actually fired. But I think this looks promising. So again, like the brown clay, I'm just going to use this stick and just going to press in some grooves for the white clay, and like this. And I think maybe I even have enough to do one extra this time. So maybe we'll just do this one too. It doesn't matter if it's uneven because it's going to be swirled around anyway. So don't worry too much about that. Unlike what I normally do, I will squeeze this cone up and down a little bit to see if that helps get rid of some of those air bubbles. It will also spread out the contrast clay, the white clay, a little more, which may or may not look good. This feels much better. Maybe pressing in the clay leaves less air bubbles, with this clay at least. Or maybe it was the coning up and down, or a combination thereof. Some potters tell you that you can only do 2 or 3 pulls. And of course, the clay gets tired if you do too many pulls, and especially if you get to add too much water over time. But I think it's actually more time question than the number of pull question, because if you work fast enough, which I don't always, then the water is not going to have enough time to soak into the clay. And in that case, you can actually get away with a lot more than the recommended 2 or 3 pulls. I had much less problems with this one. So I don't know if pressing in the clay actually helped, or pulling it up and down a little bit helped. But the swirling, the white clay, I think actually looks okay. It's swirled a little bit more. So I think that's got to do with pulling it up and down a couple of times, because of course that is going to force the clay a little more around in your pot, which, it's a design issue, but I think it's okay for this one. The final scraping with the flexible rib, and now we will see all the beautiful color. Well, the contrast comes out, hopefully. Oh yeah, and I think especially here in the top, that's good, because you're going to see that even more than the sides on a small or medium-sized vase like this. I'm going to do one more piece, the last one, with the black clay, and it's getting dark now outside, and that's what I hate about living in Denmark, up north. In the wintertime, the days are gone almost before they begin. So anyway, I'll have to do dinner after this. Anyway, so I'm going to throw one more, and I'm going to add the color in a different way. So I put in one slice of green clay. So I colored some of the 1100 clay with the same Victorian green, but then I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to add the coils a little bit different than the first time, because I'm going to do a bowl, and I want to have some of that color on the inside as well. So let's go ahead. Now I will cut out, not just on the side, but all the way inside. See here? Cut out here. I'm still going to try and go pretty deep as I can, given the fact that I now only have like one wall to work on, but and I don't want to go through the bottom, but still, we'll see. And I'm going to add the coil all the way inside, and see, that's going to give me a lot more interesting colors on the inside too. So I hope that's going to be good. So we're going to have that one dice going across, and then these coils that will go on the other way. I think that's going to be good. So now it's a little more challenging when you want to work this into the clay, because with a clay ball you can just push in, but now we already opened, so we need to be a little more gentle. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's a good idea to use a rib to push in the new clay into the clay ball. It sort of helps, align it and get a smooth surface. And you do scrape off a bit of clay. That's just how it is. The most important thing at this stage is not to rush it too much. I will try and do the thing that I also did with the other bowl that I find so difficult, but it's worth practicing, and that is using a rib both on the inside and the outside. And especially, as I said, with Swirlware, because we're trying to push the clay together, and this is much more effective with ribs on both the inside and the outside. But I do find this very difficult. So now it's a very tall bowl, and I want it to be wider. So I usually make it this V shape to begin with, and then I expand it by pushing out the top first with a rib and holding back with a sponge on the back side, and then not too much at a time, and then I slowly move it down and expand the size of the pot. That will also make it drop in height, but that's perfect because it's too high now, I think. So I'll slowly expand it this way. One of the tricky parts with the bowl is always getting a smooth and continuous curve inside very often. And I still get that sometimes. You get this, what is called a beginner's shoulder, down very close to the bottom. It kind of bulbs out a little bit, and getting that smooth all the way is difficult. Now, if you don't get it, you can always cheat a little bit and trim it afterwards. And yeah, I know, some pottery teachers will tell you never to trim the inside of a bowl. And I'm like, why? If it works, it works. And again, now is the question of when to stop. And I think we're getting very close to that point. To scrape off any excess slip. It's going to dry faster, and also it's going to give me like a peek view on how the swirly colors are going to look. That's all I had today. And I know it turned out quite a long video, but I wanted to show you some different aspects of what I can do with Swirlware. You can probably do something even better. I managed to make some bowls, managed to make some vases, and some of the combination with the brown, dark brown clay and light stripes, and the black clay and light stripes. I even made a couple more than what I have in the video here. I made one with where I colored the clay red, and I used it on the black clay, and I think that might turn out really interesting. I will do a few more, and I will get back to you once they're fired and glazed, and evaluate the final results. So come back again, and if you enjoyed this video, long as it is, please leave a comment, subscribe, share, whatever you like. And I hope to see you again next Sunday, 5 p.m. Central European Time. I'm gonna have a new video. So have a good day.